Hi, I'm Carl Weber. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series. This is the Parts of Speech program. Think of a sentence as a kind of machine, a machine for communicating ideas. The machine is made out of parts that are called words. Now, if you were an auto mechanic, you'd have to know about the different kinds of parts that go to make up a car. The transmission, the carburetor, the ignition, the radiator, and so on. A car has to contain the right parts, properly installed and well maintained if it's to run. In the same way, a person who wants to communicate effectively must understand the different kinds of words that go to make up a sentence. These different kinds of words are called parts of speech. If you understand the parts of speech and how they fit together to make up a sentence, you'll understand how words are assembled to create sentences, and you'll be able to do so correctly and effectively. In this program, we're going to go through each of the different parts of speech and see how they work together to form English sentences. There are 9 different parts of speech in English. That is, 9 different kinds of words that are used in creating sentences. In this first lesson, we'll talk about 3 of the parts of speech: verbs, nouns, and pronouns. Let's begin with verbs. As you recall, every sentence in English can be divided into 2 main parts: the subject and the predicate. The subject is what the sentence is about. The predicate tells something that the subject is or does. And within the predicate, the single most important word is the verb. A verb expresses action done by or to the subject, or it expresses a state of being of the subject. As you can see, the verb is always closely related to the subject. It tells either what the subject is or what the subject does. As you can imagine, there are many different kinds of verbs, because verbs express all kinds of actions, activities, or states of being on the part of the subject. Here are some examples of typical verbs: go, decorate, believe, is, appears. Let's look at each of these examples. Perhaps you can come up with a sentence in which each of these words would be used as a verb. Let's start with the first one, go. Can you come up with a sentence that uses the verb go? How about this one? I go to school every day. Here, the verb go is expressing an action being done by the subject, I. It tells something that I, the subject, do. How about our second example, decorate? Can you come up with a sentence including that verb? Here's one. Every spring, we decorate the gym for our annual dance. Here, the verb decorate expresses an action being done by the subject, we. It tells something that we do. We decorate. How about the verb believe? I believe it's going to rain today. Here, the verb believe is expressing an action being done by the subject, I. Notice that in this case, the action is completely internal. It's a mental action, which means it's something that other people can't see happening. Nonetheless, it is an action. So the verb believe is expressing an action in that sentence. How about the verb is? Can you come up with a sentence that uses the verb is? The weather is cloudy today. Here, the verb is linked with the subject weather. Is it expressing an action or a state of being? The verb is expresses a state of being. It isn't telling us something that the weather is doing. Instead, it's telling us something that the weather is. It is cloudy today. How about our last example, appears? Is this verb a verb that expresses an action or a state of being? Well, the verb appears is an interesting example because it can do either one. In some sentences, the verb appears expresses an action. In other sentences, it expresses a state of being. Let's consider a couple of examples. Susan appears on television as a singer. In that sentence, the verb appears is expressing an action being done by the subject, Susan. It tells us something that Susan does. She appears on television. In that sentence, therefore, appears expresses an action. In other sentences, however, appears might express a state of being. For example, the weather appears cloudy. In that sentence, the verb appears is expressing a state of being. It is telling us something that the weather is, not something the weather is doing. When we say the weather appears cloudy, we mean more or less the same as the weather is cloudy. So a verb like appears can be either a verb expressing an action or a state of being. And there are a few verbs like that in English which can go either way. They can express a state of being or an action. Notice one other thing about verbs. Verbs may contain more than one word. When a verb consists of two or more words, it's called a verb phrase, and it's made up of a main verb and one or more helping verbs. Here are a few examples of verb phrases. Had gone, will decorate, must believe, should have been, and may appear. In each of these phrases, the main verb comes last, and one or more helping verbs have been added on to modify or give further meaning to the main verb. And in each case, the helping verbs somewhat change the meaning of the main verb. For example, they may change the time in which the action is occurring. Take, for example, the verb phrase, will decorate. When I say, we decorate the gym every year, we're talking about something that's happening now. But when we say we will decorate the gym next year, we're talking about something happening in the future. So the helping verb will changes the meaning of the main verb by expressing a particular time when the event will take place. When verbs are modified or changed in this way to influence or to express the time when the action will take place, then we're talking about creating different verb tenses. Verb tenses are used to express the time when an action or a state of being takes place. The whole subject of verb tenses and of properly using verbs is fairly complicated. In fact, it's so complicated that we've devoted an entire program to that subject. And if you're interested in learning more about how to use verbs properly, we recommend you watch that program. Let's move on to the second important part of speech, nouns. A noun names a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. Here are some examples of nouns. Student, Barbara, state, Cleveland, sofa, freedom. All of these are nouns because they name a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. Let's look at each example. What about student? What does that name? Well, that names a person, or at least a kind of person. How about Barbara? That names a person, and it names a specific person. We'll talk in a moment about the special kind of noun that Barbara represents. What about state? What does that name? Well, that names a place. A state would be one of the 50 states that goes to make up the United States, and it's a place where you might live. Cleveland also names a place. Again, a very specific place, a particular city within the United States. Sofa names a thing, and freedom names an idea. Sofa and freedom are both nouns, but notice that one of them names something that you can lay your hands on, something that you can see, something that you can perceive with your senses. That's sofa. Freedom, however, names something that's much more difficult to grasp. It's not something you can see with your eyes or touch with your hands. Freedom is an idea. It's an important concept that many people think about a lot, but it's not something you can point to or perceive with your senses. And that's another example of a kind of noun, a noun that names an idea. Now, within the broad category of nouns, there are two particular types of nouns that you need to be aware of. These are a common noun and a proper noun. A common noun names a category of people, places, things, or ideas. A proper noun names a specific example. A proper noun normally begins with a capital letter. Therefore, it's important to recognize the difference between a common noun and a proper noun, since when you're writing them, you need to know whether to use a capital letter or not. We've already seen a couple of examples of proper nouns. Barbara, a moment ago, is an example of a proper noun. Why? Because it names a specific example of a person, rather than a category of people, like student. That's why when the name Barbara is used in a written sentence, it would begin with a capital letter. In the same way, Cleveland is a proper noun. It names a specific example of a city rather than the broad general category of cities, so that the noun city would be a common noun, whereas Cleveland, which names a specific city, would be a proper noun. And that's why Cleveland would begin with a capital C when you were writing a sentence using the word Cleveland. Here are a couple of other examples to help you see the difference. The word month is a common noun because it describes a category of things. All the different months would fit into the category of month. May, however, would be a proper noun because it names a specific month of the year, the 5th month of the year in the Western calendar. One more example. The noun ocean is a common noun. It describes a general category of things. Large bodies of water are called oceans, and all the oceans in the world fit into that category. The word Atlantic is a proper noun. It names a specific example of an ocean, one particular ocean that's found in a certain place on the map. It's a vast place, of course, but nonetheless it's one and only one ocean. So Atlantic is a proper noun and would always be written with a capital A. One other thing to know about nouns is that nouns may be singular or plural. In English, we draw these two distinctions between a singular noun, which refers to one and only one thing, person, place, or idea, and a plural noun, which refers to a number of people, places, things, or ideas. Two or more would be plural. In English, most plural nouns are formed simply by adding the letter S to the end of the singular noun. So, for example, the common noun a sofa would be made plural simply by adding an S at the end and turning it into sofas. If you have one sofa in your living room, you would spell it S-O-F-A. If you have two sofas or more, you would add an S at the end and the word becomes sofas, which is plural for sofa. There are a few nouns that change their form from singular to plural in a slightly different way. Some, for example, don't end in the letter S at all. The common noun man becomes men in the plural. Similarly, woman becomes women in the plural, and child becomes children in the plural. Some other words do add an S at the end, but also change their spelling in some other way when they move from singular to plural. So, for example, the noun leaf, which is singular, becomes leaves in the plural. The F turns into VE, and then the S is added as well. When you learn a new noun, perhaps by looking it up in the dictionary, make a note of how the plural is formed. And in particular, if the plural is formed in an unusual way, make a note of it so that you'll be able to spell it correctly the next time you use the word in a sentence. The third important part of speech is pronouns. A pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun or a group of nouns. Here are some examples of pronouns. He, she, it, we, they, some, any, who, which, someone. There are many more examples of pronouns and various kinds of pronouns. Again, pronouns are a complicated subject, and we've devoted an entire program in this series to learning all about pronouns and how to use them correctly. So in this program, we're going to speak briefly about pronouns and explain some of the basics that you need to understand. We say that a pronoun takes the place of a noun or a group of nouns. Now, why would you want to use a pronoun in place of a noun or a group of nouns? The basic reason is to avoid unnecessary repetition. Suppose you were writing a story about someone named Mark, and Mark did a number of things in the story. It might get rather tiring to keep referring to Mark by name. Mark went for a walk. Mark walked in the park. Mark saw birds. Mark saw trees. Mark decided to go for lunch, and so on and so forth. By the time you finished reading one page of that story, the reader would be tired of hearing the name Mark repeated over and over and over again. Therefore, pronouns were invented to provide a little relief and a little variety. The second time you refer to Mark in that story, you don't have to use the noun Mark. Instead, you can substitute the pronoun he, or in other contexts, a pronoun like his or him. So, for example, your story about Mark could talk about Mark going for a walk and then saying, he decided to have lunch. He went with his brother and they enjoyed lunch together. By using the pronouns he and his and they, the same nouns don't have to be repeated over and over again. The sentence becomes a little more enjoyable and interesting to read, and you don't have the boring repetition of the noun over and over again. So pronouns were invented basically as a way of adding greater variety to writing and making it unnecessary to keep repeating the same nouns over and over again. As you can see, a pronoun always refers back to some noun, or in some cases, a group of nouns. And it's important that the connection between the pronoun and the noun or nouns to which the pronoun refers be very clear. The word or words that a pronoun refers to is called the antecedent of the pronoun. Here are a couple of examples of how an antecedent works. Angela quickly ate her lunch. What pronoun do you notice in this sentence? The pronoun is her. Now, what noun does the pronoun her refer to? Or what noun does the pronoun her take the place of? It refers back to Angela. It takes the place of Angela because in writing this sentence, the author could have repeated that noun Angela. The sentence could have said, Angela quickly ate Angela's lunch. But that sounds a little awkward and repetitious, doesn't it? So instead, the writer substituted the pronoun her for the noun Angela's and wrote, Angela quickly ate her lunch. That means that the antecedent of the pronoun her is Angela. Angela is the noun to which the pronoun her refers. And you'll notice that the two match in the following way. Is Angela a male or a female? Well, in English-speaking countries, the name Angela is normally used for a female, a woman, or a girl. And that's why the pronoun her has been used, because the pronoun her is also female. It refers to a woman or a girl. So the pronoun and the antecedent in this case have to match in terms of gender, that is, in terms of male or female. And in the special program All About Pronouns, we'll talk more about the importance of making sure that a pronoun and its antecedent match in various ways. Gender is one of the ways in which the pronoun and its antecedent have to match. Here's another example. Jeremy asked Paul to give him a ride. What's the pronoun in this sentence? Here the pronoun is him. Now, can you tell what noun him substitutes for or refers back to? In this case, the pronoun him refers back to Jeremy. We can tell by reading this sentence that Jeremy is asking Paul to give Jeremy a ride. That's the logical interpretation of the meaning of the sentence. So the pronoun him refers back to an antecedent, Jeremy. It's always important when you use a pronoun to be sure that you're clear as to what the antecedent is, so you can make sure that the meaning of the sentence is clear, and so that you can make sure that the pronoun and its antecedent match in every way that's important, including gender. In these two sentences, the pronoun does match the antecedent, and therefore the pronoun is correctly used. In your study guide, we've provided an exercise to test and reinforce the information you've learned in this lesson. Please turn to your study guide and try your hand at that first exercise. In this exercise, your job was to read 5 sentences and, in each one, identify the nouns, the verbs, and the pronouns used. Let's see how well you were able to carry out this assignment. Let's look at the first sentence. When Nicole read the letter, she realized that she must change the plans for her vacation. Let's begin with the nouns. How many nouns did you identify in this sentence? This sentence actually contains 4 different nouns. The nouns are Nicole, letter, plans, and vacation. One of these nouns is a proper noun. That's why it begins with a capital letter, and that's the noun Nicole. It's a proper noun because it names a specific individual. All the other nouns in this sentence are common nouns. They name categories of things, and that's why they don't have to begin with capital letters. Notice that plans, the third noun given in this sentence, is a plural noun. It refers to more than one plan. The other nouns here are all singular, letter and vacation. What about verbs? How many verbs did you find in this sentence? There are actually 3 different verbs: read, realized, and must change. Remember, some verbs are verb phrases. They consist of more than one word. The verb must change is a verb phrase. It includes the main verb, change, and the helping verb, must. Finally, pronouns. How many pronouns did you recognize in this sentence? There are 3 pronouns: she, and her. All 3 of these pronouns have the same antecedent. They all refer back to the same noun, namely Nicole. You could rewrite this sentence to substitute the proper noun Nicole for each of those pronouns. The sentence wouldn't read very well then, but the meaning would still be the same. When Nicole read the letter, Nicole realized that Nicole must change the plans for Nicole's vacation. That sounds silly, and no one would ever write or speak that way. But that shows you how pronouns refer back to antecedents. They take the place of nouns. Did you get all of those answers correct? I hope so. Let's take a look at the second sentence. Henry Ford created the Model T, which was for many years the most popular car in the world. Let's begin with nouns. There are several nouns in this sentence. The first is Henry Ford. That's a proper noun because it names a particular person, and both parts of this noun, Henry and Ford, begin with capital letters. Model T is another proper noun. It also names a particular type of car, a particular type of vehicle, and therefore model and T both begin with a capital letter as well. Years, car, and world are also nouns. Those 3 also name general categories of things, and these are common nouns. That's why they don't begin with capital letters. What about verbs? How many verbs did you notice in this sentence? There are 2 of them, created and was. And what about pronouns? Did you notice any pronouns in this sentence? This is a little bit tricky. The one pronoun that's in this sentence is the pronoun which. That's a different kind of pronoun than the pronouns we saw in our first sentence, which referred back to Nicole. In this case, the pronoun which is a special kind of pronoun known as a relative pronoun. It's not important for you to remember the term right now, but generally speaking, relative pronouns are used to connect one clause or one part of the sentence to another. And in this case, you can see that the relative pronoun which connects the first and the second parts of this sentence together. The pronoun which refers back to Model T. The Model T was for many years the most popular car in the world. So a relative pronoun does have an antecedent, just like the personal pronouns that we saw in the previous sentence. Again, it's not important right now to learn the names of the different types of pronouns, but it's good to recognize that a word like which acts more or less the same way as a noun, but which takes the place of a noun, is in fact a pronoun, just as she or he are pronouns. Let's look at the third sentence. Is anyone in your class interested in attending next week's seminar on Italian painting? Again, let's begin with nouns. Which nouns did you recognize in this sentence? The nouns here are class, weeks, seminar, and painting. You might be curious about the second noun here, weeks, which ends with an apostrophe S. The apostrophe S is usually used in English to turn a noun into a possessive noun. And you use the possessive form of the noun when describing something that belongs to or is related to the noun. In this case, the seminar belongs to next week or is related to next week. Next week is when that seminar is going to be held. So you can refer to that in English as next week's seminar and use the possessive form of the noun week. It remains a noun, it simply takes on a slightly different form by adding the apostrophe s to turn it into the possessive form. So those are the nouns that appear in this sentence. What about verbs? Which verbs did you notice? Well, there's one verb in this sentence, and it's a slightly tricky one. The verb is a verb phrase, is interested. Notice that the words that make up a verb phrase can sometimes be separated by other words. One of the times when the words in a verb phrase are separated by other words is in a question like this. This particular sentence is asking a question. It's an interrogative sentence. And in an interrogative sentence, most often, the order of the words is a little different than in the most common declarative sentence. And one of the things that often happens is that the words in a verb phrase are separated by other words. Imagine if you were to change this sentence into a declarative sentence, making a statement rather than asking a question. You would probably bring the words of the verb phrase back together. You would say something like, anyone is interested in attending next week's seminar. And the two words of the verb phrase, is interested, would now be reunited. But to turn it into a question, we break them up in the order in which we've shown in this sentence. So, is interested is the verb phrase, interested is the main verb, is the helping verb. What is the subject of the verb is interested? It's the pronoun anyone. And this particular sentence, in fact, contains two different pronouns, anyone and your. We've already said that there are many different types of pronouns. Pronouns act like nouns, but they take the place of nouns. The pronoun anyone is from a class of pronouns known as indefinite pronouns. And they're called indefinite pronouns because they refer to one or more nouns that are indefinite, that are not specifically stated. Who or what is anyone? Well, we really don't know. The antecedent of the pronoun anyone is not definite. The person who is asking this question, the person who is stating this sentence, is referring to some unknown person in your class who might be interested in next week's seminar. Since the person is unknown, that person is referred to using an indefinite pronoun, anyone. Other examples of indefinite pronouns are someone and no one. All of these refer to people who are not specifically named, and that's why they're called indefinite pronouns. And finally, your is also a pronoun. And here, the antecedent doesn't appear in the same sentence. The antecedent, that is the person to whom your is referring, is you. It's not exactly stated in the sentence, but it's something that's understood. When you or your are used as pronouns in sentences, the person who is being referred to is you, the listener, the person who is hearing the sentence, or the person to whom the sentence is addressed. So here we have a couple of pronouns being used in slightly unusual ways. We have the indefinite pronoun anyone and the pronoun your being used to refer to you, the person hearing the sentence. Let's look at our fourth example. Tim bought several beautiful rugs while he was traveling in Turkey. Again, let's begin with the nouns. How many nouns did you recognize here? Well, there are three. Two proper nouns, Tim and Turkey, and one common noun, rugs. How about verbs? How many of those did you recognize here? There are two. One is a single word, bought, which describes something that Tim did, and the other verb phrase was traveling, describes something else that Tim did. Finally, what about pronouns? Did you notice any pronouns here? There's one, the pronoun he, and what's the antecedent of he? To whom does he refer? What is the noun that he takes the place of? The antecedent of he is Tim. The sentence could be rewritten and substitute Tim for he, but again, it would be less interesting and a little more awkward and rather repetitious, which is why the pronoun is used instead. Let's look at our last sentence. When you are designing a bridge, safety is the most important consideration. What nouns did you notice in this sentence? There are three nouns: bridge, safety, and consideration. Notice that bridge describes a thing, while safety and consideration describe ideas. Nouns very often refer to concrete physical things, things that can be seen or perceived with the senses, but remember that nouns can also refer to ideas. And safety and consideration are both ideas. They're things that you can't see or lay your hands on. No one can point to or touch something like safety. Instead, it's an idea in the mind, but it is used in the same ways as any other noun. For example, it's used as the subject of a verb. So that's how we recognize that safety and consideration are nouns, even though they don't describe concrete things the way most nouns do. What about verbs? What verbs did you notice in this sentence? There are two verbs. Are designing is a verb phrase, and is another verb. Are designing, of course, describes an action being taken by you, the subject of the verb. Is describes a state of being that affects the subject of that particular verb, which is safety. And finally, pronouns. Are there any pronouns in this sentence? You is the only pronoun, and once again, its antecedent, the thing it refers to, is you, the person who is hearing the sentence. How many of these identifications did you get right? I hope most or all of them. If you're ready now, let's move on to Lesson 2. In this lesson, we'll talk about three more parts of speech: adjectives, adverbs, and articles. These three types of parts of speech have more in common than beginning with the letter A. All three are modifiers. In grammar, the word modify is used in a special way. To modify something is to change it. Adjectives, adverbs, and articles all modify other words by giving more information about them. Let me explain how this works. Let's start with adjectives. An adjective modifies a noun or pronoun. That is, when an adjective is used in a sentence, it gives more information about or gives further explanation about some noun or pronoun that appears in the sentence. Here are some examples of adjectives: large, unusual, green, impossible. Each of these words, if they were used in a sentence, would give more information about a noun or pronoun that appears somewhere in the sentence. They give more information, and therefore we say they modify the noun or pronoun. For example, if I were writing a sentence about a boat, that word boat would be a noun. If I described it as a large boat, the adjective large would be modifying the noun boat and would be giving us more information about the boat. It would be telling us something about what kind of boat it is. In the same way, the adjective unusual would give more information about the noun hat, in a phrase like that unusual hat. The green tree, the adjective green gives more information about the tree. And an impossible task, the adjective impossible gives more information about or explains something more about the noun task. Now, in each of the phrases that I've just used as an example, the adjective comes before the noun. And in the English language, that's usually where adjectives go. However, adjectives can also be used in another way in sentences. The adjective can come after a verb of being, and the verb of being would then link the adjective to the noun, which is the subject of the verb. So, for example, rather than referring to that impossible task in a phrase like that, I could say, this task is impossible. Now, the noun task is the subject of the verb of being, is. And what comes after the verb of being is the adjective impossible. So you can see that in that sentence, the verb of being is links the noun task and the adjective impossible and shows that the two belong together. So an adjective most often comes before a noun in a sentence in English, but it can also come after a verb of being, which links the adjective to the noun or pronoun to which it refers. So look for adjectives in both of those places. Now, sometimes a word which is usually used as a noun or pronoun can be used in a sentence as an adjective. That is, it can be used in such a way as to modify a noun or pronoun, or to give more information about that noun or pronoun. Let me show you a couple of examples to illustrate what I mean. Look at this sentence. I like to watch baseball. Now, in that sentence, the word baseball is a noun. It's a thing, an activity that I like to watch. I guess you might describe it as an idea that's being named by the noun baseball. However, now look at the same word baseball in this sentence. Willie Mays was a great baseball player. How is the word baseball being used in this sentence? Well, in this case, the word baseball is not being used as a noun. It's not describing a thing that I like to watch or that Willie Mays did. Instead, it's being used as an adjective to give more information about a noun that appears elsewhere in the sentence. The noun is player. Willie Mays was a player. What kind of player was he? Well, there are actually two adjectives here that give more information about what kind of player Willie Mays was. He was a baseball player, and he was a great player. So those two adjectives, great and baseball, are being used to modify or give more information about the noun player. Player is a word describing a kind of person. It's a noun. And great and baseball are both being used as adjectives in this sentence. So the same word baseball, which was a noun in our previous sentence, is being used as an adjective here. And that's quite common in English. Speakers of English like to take words and move them around to different parts of speech. And as long as the meaning is clear, there's nothing wrong with that. Here's an example of how a pronoun can be used as an adjective. Which is your favorite sport? In this sentence, which is a pronoun. It happens to be an interrogative pronoun. It's a particular use of pronouns. And again, in our special program about pronouns, we'll talk about the various kinds of pronouns, including interrogative pronouns. But now look at the same word which in this sentence. Which sport do you enjoy the most? In this sentence, the same word which is being used as an adjective. It describes, modifies, adds information about the noun that follows, sport. It tells us that we're referring to a particular sport, namely the sport that you enjoy the most. So the same word which is used as a pronoun in one sentence, can be used as an adjective in another sentence. It all depends on how the word is used. And in this case, because you can see that it modifies the noun that follows, you can tell it's being used as an adjective rather than as a pronoun. One particular type of adjective is important enough to be considered a separate part of speech, and these are articles. An article introduces a noun, and in English there are just three articles, a, an, and the. The is called the definite article because when it's used, it states that the noun that follows is one specific noun as opposed to any example from the category. A and an are indefinite articles because when they are used, they are referring to any example from within the category. So, for example, if I say, gee, I would like an apple for lunch, I'm not specifying any specific apple. I'm just saying any old apple would be great for my lunch. If I say, I would like the apple for lunch, I'm referring to the one apple that I see on the counter in front of me right now. So that's the difference between an indefinite article and a definite article. The only difference between a and an, which are both indefinite articles, is that an is used in front of a word that begins with a vowel sound, an open sound like apple or orange. The article A is used before a noun that begins with a consonant sound, a closed sound like potato or tomato. So you'd refer to a potato, a tomato, an orange, an apple. The third type of modifying word is an adverb. An adverb modifies a verb or an adjective or another adverb. When an adverb is used in a sentence, it generally tells us how. It gives more information about the action described by the verb or the quality described by the adjective or even another adverb. Adverbs often end in ly, but not always. Here are some examples of typical adverbs, and we'll consider some examples of how these might be used in sentences. Adverbs include words like quickly, soon, very, rather, to, and not. That last example of an adverb, not, is one of the most commonly used. It often is used to interrupt a verb phrase. In other words, the word not is used in between words of a verb phrase, and when it's used in this way, it is negating the meaning of the verb phrase. It turns the verb from something that is happening into something that is not happening. And in fact, in the sample, in the way I just used the word not, that illustrates how the word not, the adverb not, is used to interrupt a verb phrase. We could refer to something that is happening, and is happening is the verb phrase, or something that is not happening. And by inserting the adverb not in the middle of the verb phrase, we turn the phrase into a negative rather than a positive. Adverbs are most often used to modify verbs. They tell how the action occurred. So, for example, you might say, he walks quickly. Here we have the adverb quickly, and it modifies or gives more information about the verb walks. Walks describes an action in this sentence, and quickly tells us a little bit more about what that action is like. It's a quick walk. It's walking that is being done quickly. It tells us how the walking is being done. So quickly, the adverb modifies the verb walks in this sentence. Notice how adverbs can also be used to modify adjectives or even other adverbs. Compare the sentence we just said, he walks quickly, with the following other sentences to see how these combinations of words can work together. He walks quickly. Quickly is an adverb modifying the verb walks. Now let's say, he is quick. The word quick, what part of speech is that in this sentence? In this sentence, the word quick is an adjective. It describes he, the pronoun he, it modifies he, tells us something about him, he is quick, and it follows the linking verb be and links the pronoun he with the adjective quick. So he is quick gives us a pronoun, a verb, and an adjective. Now what about this sentence? He is very quick. This is the same sentence except that the word very has been inserted. What part of speech is the word very? Well, very is an adverb. It's one of the more common adverbs, and in this case, the adverb very modifies or refers to the adjective quick. How quick is he? He's very quick. It gives us more information about that adjective. It tells us exactly how quick he is. So in this case, we have an adverb very, which modifies an adjective. That illustrates how an adverb can sometimes modify an adjective. Finally, look at this sentence. He walks too quickly for me. Let's look at this sentence. He walks too quickly. What about the word quickly? Let's analyze that to begin with. What part of speech is that? Well, we've seen that words that end in ly are very often adverbs, and quickly is an adverb. What word does it modify in this sentence? It modifies the verb walks. It tells how he walks. He walks quickly. So quickly in this sentence is an adverb modifying the verb walks. Now what about the word too? He walks too quickly. What part of speech is too? Well, too is another adverb, and in this case, too is modifying the adverb quickly. Remember we said that an adverb can modify a verb, it can modify an adjective, or it can modify another adverb. This is an example of an adverb modifying another adverb. Quickly is an adverb modifying the verb walks. It tells us how he walks, quickly. The adverb to modifies the adverb quickly. It tells us how quickly he walks, too quickly. So, as we've seen in these examples, an adverb can modify a verb, it can modify an adjective, or it can modify another adverb. Notice that the adverb not, which we mentioned as one of the most important and common adverbs, is often contracted to N''T. To contract a word means to shorten it by leaving out some of the letters. And when you make a contraction in English, you mark the letters that have been omitted with an apostrophe. So the adverb not is shortened into the contraction N''T. So for example, look at these two sentences. William is not going to the movies with us. Here the adverb not appears in the middle of the verb phrase is going. Remember that the adverb not isn't part of the verb phrase, even though it interrupts it. The verb phrase in this sentence is going. Not is an adverb which in this case interrupts the verb phrase or appears in the middle of it and changes its meaning to a negative. He is not going to the movies with us. Now look at this sentence. Sharon isn't going either. What's the verb phrase in this sentence? In this sentence the verb is going. And in between we have the adverb not, which has been contracted to N''T, pronounced nt. Sharon isn't going. So even though is does not appear in this sentence as a word by itself, nonetheless, if you're asked what the verb is in this sentence, the correct answer would be the verb phrase is going. And not, the contraction N''T, has been stuck in the middle to negate the meaning. This sentence could have read, Sharon is not going either. But most often, for ease of reading, we would contract not to N''T and turn it into Sharon isn't going either. The use of contractions is considered slightly less formal than using the full word. So depending on the kind of writing you're doing, you may or may not choose to use contractions. But in most writing, contractions are considered appropriate, and this is an example of how they're used. So remember that the adverb not would not be considered part of the verb phrase, even though most often it would interrupt it. In your study guide, we've provided an exercise that will give you a chance to test your understanding of these concepts related to adjectives, articles, and adverbs. In this exercise, your job was to identify each adjective, each article, and each adverb in the sentences. Let's go through them one by one. First, when water in a lake is deeply tinged with red, a heavy growth of algae is present. Let's start with adjectives. Well, there are a few adjectives here, and recognizing them may be tricky in at least one instance. Heavy is an adjective. It refers to or modifies the noun that follows, growth. And present is another adjective. Remember we said that adjectives sometimes appear after a verb of being. The verb of being links the adjective to the noun that comes before the verb of being. So the adjective present refers back to the growth. The growth is what is present. So the noun growth and the adjective present are being linked together by the linking verb, or the verb of being is. There's another word here which could be considered an adjective, and different grammarians will give different opinions, and it doesn't make a great deal of difference whether you define this as an adjective or not. But the word tinged in this sentence might be considered an adjective as well. There are really two ways of looking at this. In this particular sentence, you could say that is tinged is a verb phrase referring to the water having been tinged or colored. And is tinged could be considered a verb phrase in which tinged would be the main verb and is would be a helping verb. Another way of looking at this would be to consider is as a verb of being which links water with an adjective, tinged, meaning colored. Some adjectives do end in ed and are derived from verbs. So tinged could be considered an adjective, or could be considered part of the verb. And you should consider either one correct. Grammatically, it doesn't make much difference in how the sentence would be constructed, and it's, in a sense, simply a difference in name or wording. So those are the adjectives in the sentence. You might have been tempted by the word red, because the word red is often used as an adjective. You might refer to the red ball that came bouncing down the street, in which case red is an adjective describing the noun ball. In this case, however, red is being used as a noun. The sentence says that the water in the lake is deeply tinged with red. Red is being described here as a kind of a substance, a thing that has been used to tinge or color the water. So red is a thing in this sentence, and therefore it's a noun rather than an adjective. Remember that the same word can be used as more than one part of speech, depending on how it's used in the sentence. What about articles? Those are easy to recognize because there are just three words that can be articles: a, an, and the. And in this sentence we have the word a appearing twice. When water in a lake is deeply tinged with red, a heavy growth of algae is present. So a or a appears twice in this sentence, and those are the two articles. Finally, adverbs. Remember, we said that adverbs often end in ly, and we've got one of those in this sentence, deeply. The adverb deeply in this sentence modifies the adjective tinged. It tells us how the water is tinged with red. How is it tinged? Deeply. Remember, adverbs often answer the question how, or tell us how something happens or appears. So in this case, it is deeply tinged. That's how it is tinged. And deeply is an adverb modifying the adjective tinged. Let's look at the second sentence. If Peter has enough free time next summer, he will visit southern Italy on his vacation. We have three adjectives in this sentence. Free is an adjective modifying the noun time. It tells what kind of time, free time. Next is an adjective modifying the noun summer. It tells us what summer, which summer, next summer. It gives more information about the summer being referred to. Finally, southern is an adjective. It modifies the proper noun, Italy. It gives us more information about Italy, or tells us more about Italy. What part of Italy? Southern Italy. There's no article in this sentence. The words a, an, and the don't appear. But there is one adverb, enough. The adverb enough, in this case, modifies the adjective free. Remember, we saw that free is an adjective modifying the noun time. Enough is an adverb giving us more information about free, or about the free time. How much free time, or what kind of free time? Enough free time. So enough is an adverb modifying the adjective free in this sentence. How about our third sentence? Auto racing is generally considered one of the most dangerous sports in the world. Let's look for adjectives first. The first word in the sentence is an adjective, auto. Remember, we pointed out that some words that are usually used as nouns can sometimes be used as adjectives when they are used in such a way as to modify other nouns. That's what's happening here. The word auto is most often used as a noun. You refer to an auto coming down the street. The auto is a thing that is being referred to, and therefore it's a noun. In this case, however, we have the noun racing, describing or naming an activity, and we have auto being used as an adjective to give more information about the racing. What kind of racing? Auto racing. So here we have a word that's usually a noun being used as an adjective. Auto is an adjective. Considered is another word which, in this particular sentence, could be considered either an adjective or a verb. It could be considered part of the verb phrase is considered, or it could be considered an adjective which is linked to the noun racing by the be verb is. So considered could be considered an adjective or a verb, depending on which term you happen to prefer. Either one could be correct. Dangerous is another adjective. In this sentence, it modifies or gives more information about the noun sports. And we have two articles in this sentence. Both of them are the, one of the most dangerous sports in the world. So both of those should have been marked on your sheet as articles. Finally, there are two adverbs, Generally is an adverb. Again, notice the ending ly, which is commonly found on adverbs, and it modifies the adjective considered. How or when is it considered a dangerous sport? Generally. So it gives more information about that adjective considered. And remember, a word that modifies an adjective is an adverb. And most is another adverb. We're told that auto racing is generally considered one of the most dangerous sports in the world. So it's a dangerous sport. Dangerous is an adjective. And how dangerous? Most dangerous. So most is an adverb which gives more information about the adjective dangerous. An adverb modifying an adjective. Let's look at our next sentence. Silver Blaze was recently selected as the best story about the adventures of the famous detective Sherlock Holmes. We've got a number of adjectives here. The first one is the first word in the sentence, silver. We can see from the way it's being used here that silver is an adjective giving information about the noun blaze. What kind of blaze? A silver blaze. Silver is a word describing a color, and color words very often are used as adjectives. Selected could be considered an adjective. Once again, it's on the borderline between an adjective or a verb. Best is an adjective. It modifies or gives more information about the noun story. And famous is an adjective. It modifies or gives more information about the noun detective. So silver, selected, best, and famous could all be considered adjectives. We have three articles in this sentence. All of them happen to be the word the. The best story about the adventures of the famous detective Sherlock Holmes. And there's one adverb, recently. Again, it has the telltale ly ending, and it tells more about or modifies the adjective selected. When was it selected? Recently. So it gives more information about the adjective, it modifies the adjective, and that makes it an adverb. And our final sentence. The veterinarian arrived too late to save the injured bird. We have one adjective in this sentence, injured. It gives more information about the noun bird. It tells us something more about the bird. We have two articles, both of them the word the. And finally, we have two adverbs here. One adverb is the adverb late. What word does that adverb late modify? It modifies the verb arrived. It tells when the veterinarian arrived. The veterinarian arrived late. So the word late is an adverb modifying the verb arrived. Now what about the word to? You might remember to from our list of common adverbs. What does to modify in this sentence? Well, in this sentence, to modifies the adverb late. How late did the veterinarian arrive? Too late. So it gives more information about the adverb late. And remember, an adverb can modify a verb, it can modify an adjective, or it can modify an adverb. So in this case, we have one adverb late modifying the verb arrived, and then we have another adverb to modifying the adverb late. Two adverbs in a row, too late. Did you get most of these words correct? I hope so. When you're ready, let's move on to the next lesson. Okay, let's pause to review. We've talked about 6 different kinds of parts of speech so far. Verbs, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, articles, and adverbs. We have 9 parts of speech to talk about altogether, so there are 3 more to do. In this lesson, we'll talk about 2 kinds of connecting words, prepositions and conjunctions. First, a preposition relates a noun or pronoun to another part of the sentence. There are many different kinds of prepositions. Many of them are short words which describe a relationship between the noun or pronoun that follows and the rest of the sentence. Here are some examples of prepositions. In, for, by, from, with, to, below, through, and there are many more. One thing that's special about prepositions is that they're always followed by either a noun or a pronoun, most often a noun. The whole combination of words, the preposition and the noun that follows, is called a prepositional phrase. So whenever you see a preposition, always look for the entire prepositional phrase that the preposition introduces. So you would always see a preposition followed by a noun or a pronoun. And altogether, that combination of words makes a prepositional phrase, which fits into the sentence and adds further information about the meaning of the sentence. So looking at the prepositions I just listed for you, you can imagine for yourself a number of prepositional phrases that these prepositions could be part of. In my house, for my sister, by William Shakespeare, from New York, with my father-in-law, to Chicago, below the equator, through the tunnel, and so on. Now, some prepositions consist of more than one word. Here are a few examples. According to, because of, in front of, instead of, prior to. And again, there are other examples. You can see that although these prepositions consist of more than one word, the two or three words that make up the preposition work together and have a single meaning. And once again, each of these prepositions would come before a noun or a pronoun and form a prepositional phrase. According to the weatherman, because of today's rain, in front of the hotel, instead of dinner, prior to bedtime, and so on. So these are prepositions. They're connecting words because they connect the noun or pronoun that follows to the rest of the sentence. The other type of connecting word that's important is a conjunction. A conjunction connects two or more other words. There are a few different kinds of conjunctions that you need to be aware of. First, coordinating conjunctions. A coordinating conjunction connects words, phrases, or clauses. And there are 7 different coordinating conjunctions. They are and, but, or, nor, for, yet, and so. Each of these 7 coordinating conjunctions can be used to join a pair of words, or a pair of phrases, such as prepositional phrases, or a pair of clauses. For example, when we talked about sentence structure in the program by that name, we saw how coordinating conjunctions can be used to join 2 independent clauses to create what's known as a compound sentence. That's a common use for coordinating conjunctions. Notice that these 7 coordinating conjunctions join 2 elements which are more or less equal in value, so that when you connect words, phrases, or clauses with a word like and, or but, or nor, generally speaking, the 2 things that are being connected are roughly equal in importance. That's one characteristic of how coordinating conjunctions are used. A second type of conjunction to be aware of is the subordinating conjunction. A subordinating conjunction connects clauses, making the clause that follows the conjunction a subordinate clause. Again, in our lesson about sentence structure, we talk a fair amount about subordinating conjunctions. So if you haven't watched that program, you probably should, to get a little more background on how subordinating conjunctions are used. Subordinating conjunctions make the clause that follows into a subordinate clause, meaning one that can't stand alone as a sentence. For example, take a subordinating conjunction such as if. If the subordinating conjunction if is put in front of a clause, a group of words including a subject and a verb, that clause can no longer stand alone as a sentence. It becomes a subordinate clause, one that needs to be connected to another clause to make a complete sentence. So, for example, we might have a clause like the following: it rains this afternoon. That could stand alone as a sentence. However, when we put the subordinating conjunction if in front of it, it can no longer stand alone as a sentence. If it rains this afternoon, suddenly it feels incomplete. Something more needs to be added to turn it into a complete thought. If it rains this afternoon, the picnic will be canceled. A subordinating conjunction then creates a subordinate clause which means a clause that can't stand alone as a sentence. Notice the difference between a subordinating conjunction and a coordinating conjunction. We said that coordinating conjunctions join two things that are more or less equal in importance. A subordinating conjunction joins one thing which is independent, an independent clause, and a clause which is subordinate, less important, can't stand alone as a sentence. So whereas a coordinating conjunction links two things that are equal in value, the subordinating conjunction links two things that are unequal or different in value and importance. Here's the third and final kind of conjunction to be aware of, the correlative conjunction. A correlative conjunction comes in pairs, and there are four most important correlative conjunctions to be aware of: both and, either or, neither nor, not only but also. And the most important thing to be aware of about correlative conjunctions is that they always should be used correctly in pairs. So whenever you begin with both, you need to follow up with and. So both my mother and my father will be coming to the awards banquet. When you begin with either, you need to follow through with or. Neither needs to be completed with nor, and not only needs to be completed with but also. A common mistake that people make is to use one but not the other. The correlative conjunction must be used in its entirety, so whenever you use the first part of it, you need to use the second part. So these three types of conjunctions are important to recognize: coordinating conjunctions, subordinating conjunctions, and correlative conjunctions. They fit into different kinds of sentences and need to be followed, used according to certain specific rules. For this exercise, your job was simply to identify the conjunctions and the prepositions that appear in these sentences. Let's start with sentence 1. If gasoline prices keep rising, driving to work will become more and more expensive. Well, there are two conjunctions in this sentence. The sentence begins with a subordinating conjunction, if. That's one of the most common subordinating conjunctions. It introduces a clause which is a subordinate clause, a clause that can't stand alone as a sentence. If gasoline prices keep rising, that can't stand alone as a sentence. It's a subordinate clause, and the word that introduces it is a subordinating conjunction, if. The other conjunction is and. Remember that there are 7 coordinating conjunctions which connect words or phrases or clauses that are more or less equal in importance. Here, and is connecting the word more and more expensive. And is the most common of the 7 coordinating conjunctions. So that's the second conjunction that appears in this sentence. There's one preposition, to, driving to work. Remember that a preposition always introduces a prepositional phrase, and what follows the preposition is a noun or a pronoun. In this case, work is a noun. Work is one of those words that can be used as more than one part of speech. Work is often used as a verb. When you say, I work in the garden, you are using it as a verb because it describes action. In this case, driving to work uses work as a noun. Here, in this case, it almost describes a place. That's where you are driving to, work. So work is a noun in this case. It's the object of the preposition to. The whole thing is the prepositional phrase to work. So to is the preposition here. Let's look at the next sentence. In my opinion, Picasso was the greatest painter of the 20th century and one of the greatest of any era. There's just one conjunction in this sentence. It's the common coordinating conjunction and. It appears near the end of the sentence. However, there are 4 prepositions, and in fact, prepositions often appear in large numbers in sentences. Many sentences have several prepositional phrases, and this sentence illustrates that. In my opinion is the first prepositional phrase. In is the preposition. Of the 20th century is a prepositional phrase, beginning with the preposition of and ending with the noun a century. Of the greatest is another prepositional phrase, and of any era is a prepositional phrase. So the 4 prepositions here are in, of, and of. Notice that this sentence includes 4 prepositional phrases, 3 of which begin with the preposition of, and yet the sentence doesn't sound terribly repetitive or awkward, does it? In my opinion, Picasso was the greatest painter of the 20th century and one of the greatest of any era. It sounds fine. And that illustrates the fact that in English, it's easy to use several prepositional phrases in a sentence and create a sentence whose meaning is clear and which sounds perfectly correct and easy to read. So there's one of the lessons of this particular program, that prepositional phrases are very versatile and are good to use to express complicated meanings in English. Here's our third sentence. Neither the coach nor the players could explain the dismal performance turned in by the soccer team against their local rivals. This sentence you might have found a little more tricky. There is a conjunction in this sentence that might have been a little difficult for you to recognize. This is a correlative conjunction. Remember, those are conjunctions that work in pairs, and the correlative conjunction appears near the beginning of the sentence, neither nor. Remember, we said that when you use neither, you have to always follow up with nor. Those 2 words always belong together, so when you begin with neither, you need to use nor within a few words. So in this sentence, the correlative conjunction neither nor has been used correctly. Neither the coach nor the players. The correlative conjunction in this case is being used to connect 2 nouns, coach and players. We don't have any other conjunctions in the sentence, but we do have 2 prepositions, introducing, of course, prepositional phrases. By is the first preposition, introducing the prepositional phrase by the soccer team, and against their local rivals. Against is the preposition, and against their local rivals is the prepositional phrase. You might have been confused by the use of the word in. The word in can sometimes be a preposition. You could say, in my house, and there you have a prepositional phrase beginning with the preposition in and ending with the noun house. However, in this sentence, the word in is actually part of an idiomatic phrase. I use that expression, although I haven't used the word idiomatic previously in this program. In this case, the sentence refers to the dismal performance turned in by the soccer team against their local rivals. I think you can hear that the word in is really linked here to the verb turned, and together the word turned in, or that phrase, creates a kind of a verbal idiom which means the performance registered by the soccer team, or the performance that the soccer team gave that day. So turned in, rather than in being a preposition introducing a prepositional phrase, turned in instead is kind of a verbal phrase, idiomatic, meaning that's just an expression that's used in English, and the word in this case, is not being used as a preposition, but rather is connected to the verb turned, and the whole thing becomes a verbal idiom with a particular meaning, the 2 words being connected almost as one thing. So the word in there might have been tempting to be marked as a preposition, but the way it's used in this sentence, it really doesn't operate that way. Remember, a preposition would always be followed by a noun, which isn't the case here. Our next sentence. According to most surveys, parents usually prefer sending their children to schools located in the neighborhoods where they live. Well, there are 2 clauses here, and the second clause is introduced by a subordinating conjunction. Remember that a clause is any group of words that includes a subject and a verb. And this sentence ends with the clause, where they live. That's a subordinate clause. It contains the verb live, the subject they, and it begins with the subordinating conjunction where. Because of that subordinating conjunction, this clause can't stand alone as a sentence. You couldn't say where they live and leave that alone as a sentence. The word that begins it, where, is the subordinating conjunction, which turns it into a subordinate clause. There are also 3 prepositions in this sentence, and the first one is made up of more than one word, according to. That introduces the prepositional phrase, according to most surveys. The noun surveys concludes the prepositional phrase, and according to those two words work together as one preposition. To is another preposition, to schools, and in the neighborhoods is the third and final preposition in this sentence. Now our last example. We missed the last bus of the night, so we traveled to Oakland by taxi instead. In this sentence we have two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. The first clause is, we missed the last bus of the night. The second clause is, we traveled to Oakland by taxi instead. Both are independent clauses because each could stand alone as a sentence. The two clauses are linked by a coordinating conjunction. So, remember there are just 7 coordinating conjunctions: and, but, or, nor, for, yet, and so. And your choice of which one to use will depend on the meaning of the sentence. Here, the word so makes sense. And remember that coordinating conjunctions link two things that are more or less equal in importance or meaning, and that's the case here. In addition, the sentence contains 3 prepositions: of, in the prepositional phrase of the night, to, in to Oakland, and by, in by taxi. So there's 1 coordinating conjunction and 3 prepositions in this sentence. We've gone through 8 of the 9 parts of speech, so that means there's only 1 left. And this last one is the simplest and, in a way, the funniest. An interjection expresses a strong emotion and is not grammatically connected to the rest of the sentence. In other words, an interjection is a word that just kind of hangs out there by itself. Doesn't happen in writing very often, happens a little more often in speech, but it isn't much of a grammatical problem. Here are some examples of interjections. Gosh, yikes, ouch, hooray, or Homer Simpson's favorite, doh. Those are interjections. And since they're not connected grammatically to the rest of the sentence, you don't need to know much about them. Recognizing parts of speech is, for some students, a little tricky. Why is it important to be able to recognize parts of speech in a sentence? It's because in order to apply the rules of proper grammar, you need to know what kind of words you're dealing with, because there are particular rules that apply to the use of verbs, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and so on. We've already talked a bit about some of those rules, and in all the other programs that are part of this series, more of those rules and their applications will be explained. So being able to recognize parts of speech in the sentences that you write is rather important. Here are a couple of tips about how to recognize parts of speech in sentences that you're writing. First, the easiest thing to find is usually the main verb. So look for the verb that appears in the sentence when you're trying to identify parts of speech in your sentences. Then look for the subject of the verb, that is, the person, place, thing, or idea which does the action of the verb, or which the state of being of the verb refers to. That subject will be a noun or a pronoun. Once you've identified the verb and the noun or pronoun which is the subject of the verb, you can then begin to fill in the rest of the sentence. You can identify the modifying words, adjectives, articles, and adverbs. You can identify the connecting words, the conjunctions and prepositions. And little by little you can fill out all the rest of the sentence and understand how it all works together. So begin by identifying the verb, then look for the subject of the verb and gradually fill in the other parts of the sentence. That's usually the easiest way to understand the structure of a sentence. And remember, too, that the same word may be used as more than one part of speech. We've already seen a couple of examples, but let me leave you with one more illustration of this important fact. So you can't tell, remember, a word's part of speech just by looking at it in isolation. You need to look at how it's being used in the sentence. Take a word like surprise. A word like surprise can be used as more than one part of speech. In this sentence, Ben surprised Nancy with a party on her birthday. The word surprised is being used as a verb. It describes the action that Ben took, what he did in the sentence. How about in this sentence? It was a surprise party. Here, surprise is being used as an adjective. It modifies or gives more information about the noun party. It tells what kind of party, a surprise party. How about in this sentence? That was quite a surprise. Here, surprise is being used as a noun. It's a thing. The party is being described as a certain type of thing, namely a surprise. So, in these three sentences, the word surprise is being used first as a verb, then as an adjective, then as a noun. This is a very common phenomenon in the English language, the same word being adapted to serve several different purposes. So always look carefully at the word in the context of the sentence before you decide what part of speech it is. In your study guide, we have an exercise designed to test and to let you practice your ability to recognize parts of speech. Let's look at the first sentence and then decide what part of speech each of these words represents. My car gets 30 miles to the gallon. Following my recommendation a moment ago, let's start by looking for the verb. The verb here is gets. What is the subject of the verb? The subject is the noun car, and it's preceded by the pronoun my. My is, in this case, referring back to myself. I am the antecedent, even though I don't appear in the sentence. And pronoun my is what's technically known as a possessive pronoun. Notice that it's used almost in the same way as an adjective, but it's a pronoun because it's referring back to a person, and therefore it's taking the place of a noun. So my car gets is pronoun, noun, verb. The remaining words are an adjective, a noun, a preposition, an article, and a noun. So 30 is an adjective. It modifies the noun miles. 2 is a preposition, and it's followed by the article the and the noun gallon. Now let's look at the second sentence. People say that too many young athletes today are selfish. There are two verbs in this sentence. Say is the first verb, and its subject is the noun people. The second verb is are, which is a verb of being near the end of the sentence, and its subject is the noun athletes. Now we can fill in the other words, now that we've identified the verbs and their subjects. The word that is a pronoun. Technically it's known as a relative pronoun, and what it's doing is introducing a subordinate clause. So that is a pronoun. To is an adverb modifying the adjective many. Young is another adjective modifying athletes. And today is an adverb which modifies the verb are. That is, the young athletes of today are selfish. When are they selfish, or how are they selfish? They are selfish today. So the adverb today modifies that verb are. And the final word, selfish, is another adjective. Remember, we saw that adjectives can sometimes follow a verb of being and refer back to the noun, which is the subject of the verb. In this case, the adjective selfish follows the verb are and refers back to the athletes. So the athletes, noun, are selfish, adjective. Let's look at the next sentence. The Hudson River in New York is not actually a river. In fact, it is a tidal estuary. Two verbs in this sentence. The first one is, and the subject is river. The entire first clause is talking about what the Hudson River is. So river is the noun, which is the subject of the verb is. The second verb is also is in the second clause, and the pronoun it is its subject. Now let's talk about the other words here. We said that river is a noun. The Hudson, preceding the word river, are an article and an adjective. Hudson is an adjective telling what river. In is a preposition, and New York is a noun. It's a proper noun naming a particular state in the United States, and it's the object of the preposition. It's part of the entire prepositional phrase, in New York. We saw that not is one of the most common adverbs, and that's how it's being used here. And actually is another adverb, also modifying the verb is. A is, of course, an article, and river is a noun. Now we move into the second clause. In fact is a prepositional phrase. So in is the preposition and fact is a noun. It is a pronoun. Is, we've already seen, is the verb. And a tidal estuary is an article, an adjective, and a noun. Estuary is a noun because it names a particular thing. It's a difficult word, so perhaps you don't know that word, but you can tell from the way it's used in this sentence that it must be a noun. For example, it's introduced by an article. So even if you never saw the word estuary before, you can tell it's a noun because the sentence refers to a tidal estuary. And you only put an article in front of a noun. And tidal is an adjective because it tells what kind of estuary. So that's how we would identify the various words in this sentence. How about the next example? Paul Klee created some of the greatest abstract paintings of the 20th century. The verb here is created, and the subject is the noun Paul Klee, a proper noun naming a particular person. Now let's look at the rest of the sentence. Some is a pronoun. Remember, we talked a bit about indefinite pronouns, pronouns which refer to some unnamed thing or group of things. And the some here is referring to an unknown or unidentified group. So it is a pronoun, an indefinite pronoun. Of the greatest abstract paintings, all of that is a prepositional phrase. Of is the preposition that begins it. The is an article. Greatest and abstract are both adjectives, and paintings is the noun. So the whole thing taken together is a prepositional phrase, beginning with a preposition and ending with a noun. And the last words of the sentence are also a prepositional phrase, of the 20th century. Of is the preposition, century is the noun, and in between we have the article, the, and the adjective 20th. Now our last example. Wow, you have a really beautiful view of the Rocky Mountains from your balcony. Of course, we had to stick in at least one example of an interjection, and the first word here, wow, is our interjection. It has an exclamation point, which interjections often do, and it's not grammatically connected to the rest of the sentence. The meaning is connected, but there's no special linkage grammatically. Now let's look at the rest of the sentence. The verb is have, and the subject of the verb is you, which is a pronoun. So you have, pronoun and verb, that's the heart of the sentence. Let's look at the rest of what's here. A really beautiful view. A is an article, of course. Really is an adverb, and beautiful is an adjective. All of this goes to modify the noun view. Beautiful is an adjective modifying view, and the adverb really modifies the adjective beautiful. How beautiful? Really beautiful. So any word that modifies an adjective would be an adverb, and that's what really is. Of the Rocky Mountains is a prepositional phrase. Of is the preposition. The is an article. Rocky is an adjective, and mountains is the noun, which Rocky modifies. So of the Rocky Mountains begins with the preposition, ends with the noun, prepositional phrase. And the sentence ends with one more prepositional phrase, from your balcony. From is the preposition, balcony is the noun, and in between we have the pronoun your. Again, it's a possessive pronoun. It tells whose balcony, yours. So the antecedent of that pronoun would be you, the hearer of this sentence. And in effect, the pronoun here acts as a kind of an adjective because it gives a little more information about the noun balcony. You now have a pretty good idea of how these 9 different parts of speech are fitted together to create English sentences. In a way, it's amazing, isn't it, that just 9 different kinds of words can be put together in different combinations to express almost any conceivable human emotion or idea. In the other programs in this series, we'll provide you with additional pointers and rules to follow in selecting among these 9 parts of speech and fitting them together to create English sentences that express your meaning accurately and that are also grammatically correct. I hope you've found this program enjoyable and helpful, and thanks for watching.